Good morning, everyone. Hi, I'm Lindsay DeWitt. I'm EVP for Barkley Purpose and Sustainability Practice. And I'm so delighted to welcome you to today's event to launch our latest book, The Purpose Advantage 2.0. We have an exciting panel discussion lined up for you today, and we're so glad that you could join us. But first, a quick word about Barkley. We are a creative idea company based in Kansas City with offices in New York, Denver, and Pittsburgh. At Barkley, we build whole brands, and that started with our own. This year, Barkley became the largest agency to become a certified B Corporation, proof that it's possible to balance purpose with profit. We believe so strongly in this approach that we've actually created an entire practice here at the agency to help other brands do the exact same. A part of our core approach to delivering whole brands is a dedication to knowing the modern consumer better than anyone. A modern consumer that's also an employee and an investor. Over 10 years ago, we were the first company to launch a major research in collaboration with the Boston Consulting Group to study millennials and later Gen Z. That research was led by my colleague and collaborator, Jeff Fromm, and resulted in publishing 3 books and a whole host of other exciting collaborations. But most salient to today's event, Jeff's insights into these generations and their natural predisposition to purpose and sustainability actually led to our latest book, The Purpose Advantage. So without further ado, I want to hand things over to Jeff Fromm, 4 times author and generational expert, to tell us more, as well as his co-author and our sustainability lead at Barkley, Philippa. Hi, team.
Hi.
Morning. Thanks, Lindsay. Hi, Pip. First, I'd like to start with a quick gratitude. I'm going to try to make it brief, but I have to thank everyone who sort of directly and indirectly helped get us here, starting with Brad Hanna, who suggested some of the generational research, gutting. There are 2 Jennifers, 2 Hannahs, and 2 Joes who all helped. Dan, Jason, Tim, Michael, King, Lindsay and her team, and of course, Pip. If I ever write another book, and I hope I don't write another book, I would hope to write it with Pip, because she is the kindest, smartest, and most thoughtful co-author any person could ever have. So a little bit of a quick backstory. Before Brad suggested I look at millennials as a topic, my claim to fame was I was a backup tree in my elementary school musical, which is almost making first tree is kind of a big deal, right? But it didn't hold me back from pursuing my opportunities. And I think what excites me about this new book is the fact that it draws on over 10 years of insights. And at a macro level, sustainability and innovation are powering the tailwinds that the world's best whole brands leap onto, and they win. And so that has me super excited. And Pip, I just want to say thanks again and sort of turn it back over to you to kick us off.
Great. Well, thanks, Jeff. It was a great fun writing this book with you. And the Purpose Advantage 2.0 is really a fresh take on a topic that's been evolving for a long time. The book is part storytelling and part how-to guide, so that brands can bring to life their own purpose and back it up with sustainable actions. We couldn't be more grateful for the CEOs, CMOs, and company founders who shared their wisdom with us. And there's no other appropriate way to launch this book, in our opinion, than by sharing the space with 3 people who've contributed stories to the book and continue to inspire us every day. So we're joined today by Jerry Greenfield, co-founder of Early Purpose Pioneers Ben & Jerry's, and my old boss, and by Jorge Fontanez, CEO of the B Lab US and Canada, and Maggie McCracken, CEO of Industry Diversity Changemakers, the Brand Lab. So we're going to introduce each of our guests, hear a little bit about them and their story, and then dive into a panel discussion. But we need your participation. So please, however you're using and viewing this broadcast today, please use the chat function on whether it's Facebook, YouTube, or LinkedIn, and leave any comments and questions for our guests. We'll do our best to include your comments, and we're going to answer any questions throughout the broadcast. And thanks to Jerry, there are free Ben & Jerry's Pint coupons for the top 5 insights or questions. So what more incentive do you need to ask some good questions? So without further ado, let's introduce our first guest today. So I'd like to invite Jerry Greenfield from Ben & Jerry's. And in many ways, Ben & Jerry's needs no introduction. Who hasn't heard of Cherry Garcia or fish food? Ben & Jerry's started as a small ice cream shop in a converted gas station in downtown Burlington, Vermont, but it's come to stand for so much more than chocolate-covered marshmallow chunks and marshmallow swirls. What they're really known for today is their social mission. The lengths they go to source fair trade certified ingredients, working with small scale dairy producers, and involving their consumers in advocacy on social and environmental justice. Often people are surprised to learn that there really is a Ben and there really is a Jerry. And what's more, they're best friends, and they have been since grade school, and they still are today. So we're joined by one half of this dynamic dairy duo, Jerry Greenfield. Jerry, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Philippa. What a pleasure.
I know. Well, great. Well, can you tell us a little bit about why doing well by doing good became such a core part of Ben & Jerry's?
Sure. I think, as you mentioned, Ben and I started in an ice cream shop back in 1978, and we had no business training, no business background, and we thought we would just be a little shop. Didn't have any grand plans, whatever. And the idea of integrating values and purpose is something that evolved over time. I think it mainly came about because as the company grew, we started to understand the role that business plays in communities and in society and the power that business had. And we wanted to see if we could use our business to have positive change. And it's been a journey. When we first started out, we had no idea how to do it. And it's a lot of trial and an error. And there's still a lot of trial and error today.
Of course. And you were among the first early voices in what today we call purpose-led companies. So how do you think being mission-led has really changed the growth trajectory of Ben & Jerry's? Or has it?
You know, I'm not sure it has. It's certainly been extremely motivating internally within the company. And, you know, at Ben & Jerry's, we talk all the time about the three-part mission, particularly the social mission, and trying to be outspoken about issues and whatever. And when you look out at people who are buying Ben & Jerry's ice cream, probably a third of them know something about the mission of the company. And most people are buying the ice cream because they like the way it tastes. We are so completely focused on it ourselves. And truth be told, not everybody is thinking about it as much as we are.
Oh, really? So tell me about the three-part mission. What is the three-part mission and how does it guide you?
So, as I said, we started in 1978. In 1988, we formalized a three-part mission that has a product mission to make wonderful ice cream, a financial mission to make a reasonable financial profit, and a social mission, which is essentially to use the power of the business to help address social and environmental issues. And the way we try to do that is by integrating social and environmental concerns into the normal day-to-day business activities. So whether it's how we source ingredients, how we do marketing, trying to have impact through those as well. And then I think what we really learned is that probably the most powerful tool that a business has at its disposal is its voice. When businesses talk, the government listens, people listen, other businesses listen. And so Ben & Jerry's has been outspoken about essentially justice and fairness issues over the years. It hasn't made everybody happy all the time. And, you know, one of the interesting things is even when the company talks about dismantling white supremacy, for example, we get all sorts of complaints, and yet year after year, the company sells more ice cream.
Yeah, it's interesting that the case study around the work you did on Black Lives Matter, or the company did on Black Lives Matter in 2020, is one of the case studies that we use in the book, because it is so interesting in terms of coming from a place of consistency, having a voice, and being able to talk to those issues meant that the stance that Ben & Jerry's took in that time was more well received than other company positions on that. And we've talked before, why do you think that is? And how does the company maintain that activism?
I think it comes from really having values. You can talk all you want about being purpose-driven or values-driven, but if at the center of what you do, those values don't exist, people understand that it's not real. So it has to be genuine. And then not everybody's going to believe it's genuine, but you do what you think is right. And over time, people will come to believe that what you're doing is real.
Great. And we've got a quote in the book from a famous ad guy. He's Bill Bernbach from DDB. And he once said, "A principle isn't a principle until it costs you money." What's been your experience around this at Ben & Jerry's?
I think sometimes you make decisions thinking that maybe it's going to cost you some money to stick with what you believe in. I can think of when Ben & Jerry's first started commitment to fair trade ingredients and non-GMO ingredients, and those things tend to be more expensive. But in the long run, being true to your values does not cost you anything. It builds the brand. And you can do things all along the way. They either help build what you are or they detract from what you are. And the more things you do that build what you are, the better off you're going to be, because people are waiting for you to do things that are not consistent with your values.
Great. Thank you. And I don't know if you saw, but Alexandra Robinson, do you remember Alex from Retail Ops in the UK? She is watching live on Facebook and just said hi to us both. So great to have you out there, Alex. And again, best times of my career working with you too. So thank you, Jerry. We're going to now turn to our next panelist, and we'll bring you back on for a group discussion. But thanks very much. There's so much more to learn here, and thank you so much for joining us today. So my next guest is Jorge Fontanez. He's the CEO of the B Lab US and Canada. Welcome, Jorge. And just a little bit of background, 2021 marks the 15th anniversary of the B Lab. And the B Lab is a nonprofit that really codified what Ben & Jerry and other pioneering brands were starting to figure out, that business could lead the way to new economic systems that benefit everybody. The B Lab created a B Lab assessment that helps business assess their practices to help quantify and measure how business can be a force for good. So over 143,000 companies have taken the assessment today, and there are over 4,000 certified B corporations out there, Ben & Jerry's and Barkley among them. So we're delighted to talk to Jorge today. Thanks for joining us. And B Corps strive to not just be the best in the world, but best for the world. Can you tell us a little bit about B Lab's mission?
Thank you so much for having me here, Philippa. It's great to follow Jerry from Ben & Jerry's in this moment. And so I'll start by saying that at B Lab US and Canada, we are realizing our vision of an equitable, inclusive, and regenerative economic system. Many know us as a standards organization at our core. B Corp certification, Ben & Jerry's being one of the more famous, is what we have been about. And while that does continue to be part of our work, the way forward to advance our mission is to be more than changing the corporate DNA of companies. What I mean by that is that moving forward for B Lab US and Canada, we are working to mobilize like-minded companies, B Corp and non-B Corp, towards collective action to impact behavior, culture, and systems that are inequitable. And so in order to do that, we must deeply understand the issues of racial equity and climate justice that are with us today, that are also reinforced by both unjust practices and policies. And so we see these as interconnected issues that we have to address together in three ways. One is rooted in our what we call stakeholder economy, where businesses can create value for all stakeholders, not just for shareholders. Second, by enabling climate justice, where we contribute to regeneration, not degradation of natural ecosystems. And then thirdly, by creating a racially equitable future in which to grow within. And we do that by actively dismantling unjust racist systems.
Great. Well, and can you tell me a little bit about some of those resources? I think it's called JEDI, isn't it? That's some of the resources that you put together and some of the frameworks, and that is accessible to anybody. You don't have to be a B Corp to access those.
Right. So JEDI, or Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, is the framework in which we are operating as an organization on our journey to becoming anti-racist. And so when we talk about that, for B Lab and for the B Lab Global Network, we're recentering the importance of justice, equity, and inclusion in our work. And we also acknowledge that we have a lot of work to do. And so there are a couple of resources I can point to that are freely available. You mentioned our B Impact Assessment, which is the common tool that companies can use to evaluate all of their stakeholders in their business model across all of these issues and more. But specifically, we have the Climate Justice Playbook, and also the CEO Blueprint for Racial Equity that I would point individuals to on our website that center how B Corps in particular are using best practices to advance climate justice issues. And that's the Climate Justice Playbook that relates also to the Net Zero by 2030 commitments, where now more than 1,400 companies have committed to being net zero by 2030, 20 years ahead of the Paris Agreement. And we're continuing to be a convener to share best practices on how to get there. The CEO Blueprint for Racial Equity is where we've been partnering with our corporate racial equity alliance partners in both what to do and how to go about thinking how to create and bridge the racial equity wealth gap, for example. And so the CEO Blueprint digs a little bit deeper into what we are embracing as justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion to really create, of course, a blueprint to look at how companies can work better within the workplace for their workers, as well as in their communities, and then society writ large for those that are looking to advance policy issues.
Mm-hmm. Oh, great. Well, I want to come back to that in the panel discussion, because I think there's so much rich content there and a lot of areas to unpack. But the one thing I was really interested to share with you or ask you now is, I understand that the B Corporation, the certification, has seen unprecedented growth in the last 12 months, which is really amazing when we think about what we've gone through in terms of the pandemic, being home, and yet more and more companies are saying that they want to measure their social environmental performance and they want to be certified. What can you tell us about this growth and what's driving it, in your opinion?
Yes, I would say that especially in times of economic hardship, we've seen B Corps continue to prove that our framework is working. And we are on a journey together. We did see a growth of about 60% more registrations on the impact assessment last year. That means, you mentioned earlier, over 143,000 businesses have registered with the B Impact assessment since it was initially launched. And our community has grown by 25% in 2020.
Amazing.
Our demand and our tools are really, I think, a testimony as to that businesses are trying to figure out what matters most and how to get there. We know the why, right? We have now heightened awareness, especially around the urgency that we need to bring around climate change, as well as racial equity. And the B Impact assessment is a tool to figure out what matters and how to get there. Mm-hmm.
No, great. And then my last question is, I think you've kind of answered it, it really is that sometimes companies see B Corp certification as the end goal. And what I'm hearing you say, that really it's the beginning, isn't it, of your journey to become a more purpose-led company?
Absolutely. We have more and more proof points that we are a more resilient movement. The B Corp community is demonstrating this in a few ways. While millions of businesses worldwide had to close their doors permanently, we've seen growth within our B Corp community because of the kind of thinking that the tool allows business leaders to take hold of. That means 52% of B Corps hired more employees. 47% of B Corps experienced employee growth of more than 15%. 2/3 of all B Corps saw increased revenue in 2020. And so we're seeing that engaging in the community, sharing best practices, and using our tools does help business become more resilient over time.
Yeah, so that really speaks to that purpose profit loop, this idea of the business case of doing the right thing.
That's right.
Great. Well, thank you, Jorge. There is so much more to explore, and I look forward to hearing more in our panel discussion. But next up, I'd like to introduce our third and final panelist today, Maggie McCracken. She's the CEO of the Brand Lab. Welcome, Maggie.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks. Great to have you. And so while the bridge here is from Bree Corporation, which seeks to help businesses transform across all aspects of their operation from people to planet, Brand Lab is a nonprofit that's laser focused on changing the face and voice of the marketing industry. They envision an industry that thrives with the creativity and insights of all, and they've had incredible success in their hometown of Minneapolis, increasing representation for people of color in marketing and advertising from 6 to 11%. And in Maggie's own words, that is not enough, and they're still striving for more, but it's still a remarkable achievement. And as Barkley, we're a committed partner to the Brand Lab, and all the proceeds from the Purpose Advantage 2.0 are being donated to Brand Lab. So we're delighted to be joined today by the CEO, Maggie McCracken. And Maggie, can you tell us why it's so important that we do change the voice and the face of the marketing industry?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, marketing and advertising really shapes culture in so many ways, and it tells stories. And so ensuring that the stories that the industry is telling and the connections that it's working to have with communities and with consumers, that those stories are reflective of teams that have the perspective and the diversity of what those communities and consumers that they're looking to connect with is just critical to the success. So, I think it's something that if the industry doesn't continue to evolve and look at how it can become more diverse, but also more inclusive, it's not just the diversity, it's that inclusivity that's really critical. It just won't be as relevant. It won't be relevant with communities, with individuals, with consumers. And so it's critical to the future of the industry.
Right. Well, and can you tell us a little bit more for those that might not be so familiar? What is the big distinction between diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, when we look at diversity, it's, what is the representation of a team at any given table, right? But inclusion is really, research shows that it's really inclusive teams that are actually feel that they belong, that they have a voice in the work and how the work comes to life. And it's really workplaces that are not only diverse, but also are tapping into the insights and the perspectives of that diversity. That's when you really see the innovation. That's when you really see the creativity come to life. And so it's important that it's not just about demographic representation, that it's also about how workers and workplaces are creating more inclusive workplaces so that young people and the future of the industry really feel like they can show up and thrive.
No, that sounds great. So can you tell us a little bit about your approach? How do you bring that about inside an organization? I think you have 4 pillars. Is that right?
Yeah, we do. We have 4 pillars. And so our work really is unique in the fact that it looks at the challenge of changing the face and the voice of the industry from 2 angles. From the angle of how do we create pipelines? How do we look at introducing and bringing talent into the industry? But also our 4th pillar, which I'll hit on here in a minute, is about how do we walk alongside our partners at corporations and agencies to ensure that they are really looking to create more inclusive workplaces. So our first 3 pillars are focused on talent. It's access. So how do we start in the classroom, introducing young people as early as high school to career paths that they might not otherwise have known about, because you can't ask for a job if you don't know it exists. Mm-hmm. Our second pillar is our access pillar. And so that is is really where we provide paid internships for high school and college students. And so that's really that skill building piece, and making sure that young people have access to those paid internships. Our third pillar is opportunity. And so opportunity is really where once you're an alumni, if you're a young person, once you're an alumni of our program, you really stay connected. So it's about leadership. So we have youth leadership, we have mentorship, we have scholarships. And so that's our opportunity pillar. And that last pillar for us is equity. And that's really where our Fearless programming comes to life. And so our Fearless programming is diversity, equity, and inclusion workshops that we bring into the workplaces of our partners. This is where, we have workshops that were created by BIPOC marketing leaders for marketing industry. And so we work alongside a lot of different partners in that way.
Great. Yeah. Well, I've personally participated in some of your Fearless workshops, and I can attest that they're awesome. But just in terms of, where is BrandLab active today? I mentioned Minneapolis, Kansas City. What else is on the agenda for BrandLab and your growth?
So the BrandLab has been operating for over a decade in the Twin Cities. And so this is where we have our largest market. We expanded 4 years ago into Kansas City. And this past week, we actually launched into the Milwaukee market. Yeah. So we're
congratulations.
Super excited to be expanding and have some really amazing momentum in all three markets. Our Fearless work is work that can be done anywhere. And I think the reality of, COVID-19 and the shifting workplace dynamics really allowed us to actually introduce our Fearless work across the country, to be honest. But when we think about young people and connecting them into opportunities, we're looking at those three markets, but also continue to look at other markets that are interested in really stepping in a big way. It requires community to come together across education, community partners, but also across creative partners and corporate partners to really bring the model to life.
No, that sounds great. And so obviously everyone nationally can access your Fearless conversations and then opportunities for people in local markets. And I don't know if you saw there while we're talking, but we have a LinkedIn user who's listening in today, who's one of the graduates of your program. So
wonderful.
Excited to see that. There we go. There's that comment.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah, some great outcomes. So thanks, Maggie. Thanks for letting us, and also one more thing, just how long has BrandLab been going?
Yeah, so we've been around for over a decade, since 2009. And in that time, we, in our exposure pillar, have connected over 6,000 young people to creative careers, introduced them. We've had over 600 paid internships, both at high school and college levels. And more young people are entering the industry every week. We actually just heard of another alumni who got their first job yesterday. So just super excited to continue to see the work in action.
Great. Well, thank you. I'm now going to invite the rest of the panel back and begin our overall conversation. Welcome back, Jerry. Welcome back, Jorge.
Thank you.
Well, one of the first topics I wanted to talk about is this idea of being a whole brand, of intersectionality of these different issues. And we heard Jorge talk about the connectedness of racial justice. Obviously, Ben & Jerry's is working on racial justice as well as climate justice. And often as marketeers, we've been trained to think about a topic with laser focus precision. But in this space of purpose, ESG or sustainability, whatever you call it, there's this keen demand for a business to be good on multiple fronts. And so it's kind of a paradigm shift, I think, for marketing. How do you see this, and how do you think we can help brands and marketeers and companies start to think more holistically about their brand's impact? And I'm going to start with Jorge, because I know you've done a lot of work with lots of different types of organizations. So what are your thoughts on this?
I love this question, Philippa. You're right, and also in my capacity teaching at the Bard MBA and Sustainability program, my course in Stakeholders in Marketing addresses this at its core. So for marketers in particular, the conversation has shifted. We are no longer talking about how customers influence the brand, but how all stakeholders influence corporate reputation. And also Wall Street is paying attention, right? When we look at how investors are valuing a brand, 80% of the value of a company is now reflected in intangibles, right? And so the work of marketers means that we need to work across the organization. We no longer can be siloed, and we need to be thinking about not just how we continue to deliver customer satisfaction, but also how we manage the influence and interest of multiple stakeholders who might ultimately have even more impact on our long-term brand reputation.
No, that's a great answer. I love the fact that you're also at Bard MBA and helping to school a new generation of marketing thinkers. And now I wanted to turn the question over to Jerry. You know, you said you don't have a marketing background. If I know, you did pre-med, right? So there was nothing to lose in your journey into this area. But how do you recruit for the people inside the organization to get them to think in this kind of intersectional way? Or how do you foster this culture?
Well, so even though I don't know anything about marketing, Ben actually does. Although Ben is completely self-taught anyway. So
is there a benefit maybe to being self-taught versus coming through a traditional business school when it comes to this?
Absolutely. You know, the basic idea for marketing at Ben & Jerry's and how it connects with values. Ben has always said that there are no stronger bonds that you can forge with your customers than through shared values. You know, you can come up with marketing campaigns that are humorous or attractive people having a wonderful time together, but that is also transient. And there is just nothing so strong. And so I think when Ben & Jerry's is at its finest, and it's not often at its finest, but when it is, it sees itself not as selling ice cream, but as partnering with all of its community, its customers, its employees, to work together to bring about a more fair and equitable world. And it does that through selling ice cream. You know, the company describes itself as an aspiring social justice company, which, you know, I think is kind of a nice turn of a phrase, but hopefully it's a real thing.
No, I can believe it from the inside out. And Jeff Fromm actually always opens some of his keynotes by saying, you think Ben & Jerry's is an ice cream company. Actually, it's a social justice company that sells ice cream. And that's certainly been my experience, which is a different way of thinking, which is why I think it's so hard to imitate in so many ways.
You know, I just want to jump in for a second to some of the things Jorge has said, and even you, Philippa, the idea that this is a journey. Jorge has mentioned it a couple of times, and that has been so much of our experience at Ben & Jerry's, you know, starting from 43 years ago. And you'd think by now we would have it figured out. And, you know, B Corps and B Lab has been around for a while. You think they'd have it figured out. Maggie's been around over a dozen years. And it's so critical to continue to grow and learn that you don't really have it figured out, and you do make mistakes along the way. You know, that's one of the things people ask about values at Ben & Jerry's and taking stands. Aren't you concerned about making mistakes? And it's true for anything in business. If you're not taking risks, if you're not trying things and failing, you're not trying enough new things.
It's a really interesting perspective. We were just at a conference last week, Sustainable Brands, where they talked about the importance or the certainty with which we look to leaders and institutions to be certain about things. But actually, the real creativity comes when you admit that you don't have all the answers, because then you're free to explore.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's relevant here, you know, companies understand that it's fine to take risks and make mistakes when they're making new products or coming out with new things. For some reason, in the field of values and mission, people feel like they're going to be held to a different standard, and they can't afford to try things and make mistakes there. And it's actually should be just like all the other parts of a business.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's that cancel culture, isn't it? Is that people are super afraid to make a wrong step and then be silenced.
Yeah.
I wonder, Maggie, do you have any perspectives on that you want to share?
Well, I was just thinking about how much change we've all been through. And I think that, hearing Jerry talk is something that we've been looking at in our organization, is just reminding ourselves that as we move through the racial reckoning that we've seen over the past 2 years, especially as we move through COVID-19, we shifted our entire model from an in-person experience to virtual experience. And now we're looking at, what does that hybrid look like? And I think one of the things that breaking down those silos, asking ourselves, well, why did we always do it that way? And really creating that culture internally of how do we make it okay for people to take risks, to make mistakes, and really model that, I think is just something for sure that I think is going to be critical no matter what industry you're in at this point and moving forward, for sure.
And that's great. And the kind of the point that we're in at the moment, this nexus between the global pandemic, the climate emergency, the civil rights reckoning, I just wonder, we talked a lot about how business is changing. Can it ever go back to business as usual from this point? What do you think is unique about this moment that we're in right now, and how can we make the most of it? And maybe we'll start with you, Maggie.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's this, we're in this collective experience, and more so than we've maybe have been in previous times. And so for me, I'm hopeful that we can't go back, right? I'm hopeful that we're moving forward and that urgency remains. That's something that I think we talk a lot about with our partners is, we've seen an influx of folks that want to join, that want to talk about how they can partner with us. But I think one of the things that we continue to look at is, okay, this isn't a checkbox. This is a journey. And so how do we make sure that we're partnering with partners who are really invested in this work? But I'm hopeful that we can't go back. I'm hopeful that the urgency remains. And I think it takes all of us, to step into those spaces and make sure that we are continuing to push and continuing to move forward. But I feel that this collective experience that we all have had and are having is something that I hope keeps that momentum going.
Great. Jorge, any thoughts here?
Philippa, well, your book points out something that I think is worth
Thank you for reading it.
saying here, which is that if your employees are not on board with where you're headed, you shouldn't expect that anyone outside of your organization is on board, right? And so I think this maybe speaks to your question about whether business will go back. I think was part of how you framed it, and I really hope not. I really hope not. I think that if leaders are paying attention to their employees, this is a pivotal time to be taking a more emergent approach with employees to define what the next chapter of your business looks like. And that's actually what we've been doing at B-Lab. I mean, B-Lab US and Canada and our conversations around and becoming anti-racist have started with how our team shows up in that way, right? And so we need to be building our own capacity as well as taking B Corp business leaders along that journey as well, right? And so we're looking to not only evolve the way our standards reflect these kinds of commitments because of the heightened awareness, but what really business leaders are looking for is a roadmap. How do we really get there? How do we make this happen? And I think that part of the advantage that you point out in your book is that employees can be that competitive advantage if you're willing to give up some power and actually engage them in the process.
Yeah, and that's a challenging thing for a lot of organizations, isn't it? And Jerry, I know from stories that you were often in the Ben & Jerry's factory over the weekend in the overtime shifts right there with your employees at different times in Ben & Jerry's history. Can you tell us a little bit about how employees have played a role over the 43-year history of the company?
I certainly will. I just want to take a minute to talk about how thrilled I am to be with the other panelists here. This is like so incredible for me. This is great. And I do have to put in a plug for B Lab and B Corp. I am just a huge believer in that. And if anybody is thinking of becoming part of that community, it's an amazing community. Other B Corps will do anything for the B Corp community anytime. It's just kind of amazing what you guys have built. So that's incredible. When I think about the time we're in, particularly with, it's a time when people are rethinking what's important in their lives. And they're rethinking it particularly in connection with their jobs and how they spend so much of their day. And I think it's an opportunity for businesses to think about, what do they really stand for? What are they about? Have the things they've been doing been really meaningful? And, it's kind of interesting. You see businesses speaking out after the murder of George Floyd like they've never done before. You see businesses getting involved in voting and democracy issues like they've never done before. To me, it's sort of an open question. Will business follow through, or is it just sort of what's happening now? And will we move on to whatever's next? But I think employees, staff are pushing businesses to be standing for something more than simply maximizing profits. It's not that motivating to go to work at a company where your job is to maximize the profit for the corporation. I mean, does that move most people? I don't think so.
No. I mean, I think it's interesting that you call it the Great Rethink instead of the Great Resignation. I mean, every time you pick up the newspaper right now, we're talking about all these people leaving the workforce. And it's not giving up. It's kind of rethinking, I think, as you're talking about. It's just such a different way of thinking about it.
Yeah, and it kind of begs the question when you talk about your book and when you talk about purpose, that's where it all starts. What is the purpose of a business? What is the purpose of a corporation? Is it to make and sell products and provide services? Or do you define businesses as a combination of organized human energy plus money, which equals power? And as this powerful force, what is the role of business in our communities and our society? That is the starting point, and that leads to everything else.
Mm-hmm. And so what do you think would be the first point for someone to try and understand what their values or what their purpose should be? Because I think that is part of the challenge, isn't it, for some organizations, is thinking outside of the current paradigm of profit maximization. How do you move into a new space?
It's a lot about leadership at a company. I mean, for as much as we say it's all about the people and they make everything happen, yes, it's true. But if you don't have leadership that is behind making something happen at a company, it's not going to happen.
Yeah,
it's just not. I mean, that has been my experience. And so you have to have leadership that is motivated by purpose, that sees itself as larger than simply producing products or providing services.
Yeah. And Jorge, what's been your experience dealing with some of the companies at B Co-op? And then I know you also did a lot of consulting before with businesses led by people of color in terms of how do they step into that space of being more purpose-led?
I mean, I want to underscore what Jerry has said about the role of leadership, reflecting that true north vision of what rallies employees to get behind the organization. And I think in answer to your question, what I think about, one of the components of our B Impact Assessment tool is looking at your business model, how your business model actually can create a dual purpose of generating financial returns and impact to society or the environment. And what I'll say about this is that I think that we're in a moment where decision-making by leaders that includes the employees and then takes on the sustainability lens and the social lens is where it is ripe for innovation, right? So to the marketers in your audience, we look for constraints to breed innovation, right? And so I'm thinking back to your book, right? Your purpose is clear. It takes you on a path. the sustainability aspect of your purpose anchors you in a commitment that creates a constraint. And that's where the innovation is. It's figuring out how does the core competencies of the company and the core of its business model, how might it shift to address both, we'll call it triple bottom line, integrated bottom line, right? We need to be thinking more urgently about the kinds of issues and in a more complex way about the kinds of issues our businesses might address. But I think both leadership and bringing employees along to co-create that process is critical. And I think that our B Corps are realizing this for themselves as well. Throughout the pandemic, what are some of the ways in which resiliency showed up is ensuring that leaders were taking care of their employees, that they were looking at either workplace initiatives for income advancement or looking for ways to ensure that they could support employees through a downturn and reskilling them. And that's where our communities of practice within the B Corp community really shine, right? Because we have the opportunity to connect B Corps and say, we have talent in other B Corp companies that might be available for you all to tap into. And that's the kind of behavior that we are modeling that we really want to see in society writ large, seeing businesses act more cooperatively rather than just competitively.
No, I think that's some great points. Maggie?
Yeah, I just love, Jorge, that reality of co-creation and what does that look like as we move forward, both internally, but also externally. Like I think about now, even just being here with you all, right? It's this for-profit, nonprofit, right? We have to think about how we break down those walls across sectors and really tap into the learnings, because I do think that co-creation, that collaboration is going to be so huge for where we could go, right? And what we can do and how we rethink models and systems that have not worked for everyone or worked effectively always in the past. And so how do we bring folks together to the table and really lift up and rethink? I get super motivated about that. And I think that's something we're continuing to look at internally. What does that look like for our organization as we think? But then also we have this amazing group of partners and invested communities. And so how do we bring them to the table and talk about some of the challenges that we all are facing? Yeah.
No, I think that's really interesting because what we're talking about is, what you're good at, your core competencies, as you say, as an organization, and then what the world needs and finding that unique space between that, but also those different voices that you bring to the table and how they might encourage you to have different thoughts about how that might apply. So yeah, incredible cross-fertilization, I think, between these different areas. And Jerry, I wanted to ask you a question about one of the case studies in the book is also about the statement on from Ben & Jerry's on how you move through dismantling white supremacy, and the statement that was put together by the company. I think it really speaks to that collaboration between nonprofits and for-profit companies. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely.
That came about?
So Ben & Jerry's is involved in, several different issues, whether it's climate justice, racial justice, whatever. And the company is smart enough to understand what it's good at and what it's not so good at. And what it's not so good at is really understanding the depth of issues. And so Ben & Jerry's works with nonprofits who are in those areas, whether it's color of change, whether it's a vase. And so what Ben & Jerry's happens to be really good at is communications, telling stories, using its voice to talk about issues, and combining it with ice cream, which is kind of a whimsical and fun way to talk about serious issues. But it's connecting with those nonprofits, those experts in the field, that gives Ben & Jerry's that insight into what really are racial justice issues. How should we talk about them? what are climate justice issues? How should we talk about them? And then let's use our voice to amplify those.
No, that's great. Maggie, any on your side, how the collaborations between nonprofits and corporates have come to bear on the issues that you're working on?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think some of the work, we partner with corporations and creative agencies across the markets that we work in. So continuing to come together to look at within our Fearless work, not only do we have our workshops, but we also have a state of the industry report. And so that's a biannual report where we really ask the organizations that we partner with to start to share what does it look like in terms of how your organization is changing demographics. But also this past year when we did it, we really started to dig into what we called the pulse. So really understanding that belonging and that inclusivity piece. And I think one of the things we're excited to walk alongside, and by no means are we territorial about DEI and B work. We know there's lots of amazing experts out there. And so we're more focused on making sure our partners are on the journey, whether they're partnering with us or otherwise, right? But we've been having conversations about how, when we look at these data points around inclusivity and belonging, it was actually taken at a time that was before COVID, before the renewed racial reckoning. And so what we're really looking forward to digging into with our partners is when we do this next summer and we field that, right? There's been all these commitments and new action groups put it together. Our Fearless workshops have been in a lot more organizations. We have organizations stepping in and hosting interns. But is it truly changing? How is it feeling to employees on the inside from an inclusivity and belonging standpoint? And then how do we walk alongside and really understand what that looks like? And so we're looking forward to being on that journey with our partners and thrilled that they're willing to step into that space with us.
No, that sounds great. Jorge, did you have a comment to make there?
I mean, so we are a nonprofit, right? So we grow in this work through partnerships naturally, and we want and are creating partnerships with policymakers as well as with businesses so that we can advance our work. I would also say that particularly, so where we lead on stakeholder governance in particular for policy change is where we, I think, have been ahead of other organizations in helping to change, for example, the availability of public benefit corporation status in over 40 states, right? That core pillar that allows businesses to reincorporate and charter and put into their mission to ensure that the board of directors adheres to a stakeholder capitalist model, not just shareholder model, right? And so we've done that, and now we're building on that legacy to advance our work on climate justice and racial equity. And we need partners to do that work, and we also need to center the Black, Brown, Indigenous, people of color who have been at the forefront of this work for decades. And this is where we are encouraging not just our work to advance forward on the policy front, but other businesses to advance how they engage in policy locally by being in community, by talking to their community leaders and understanding how their issues and challenges that are systemic might be overcome with business as a force for creating that change.
No, I think that's so interesting, isn't it? Because I guess companies are always lobbying behind the scenes for things that they want. It's just not always that visible. And I think what you're calling organizations to do is to be more transparent about that and to make it line up with any sustainability and purpose commitments that they might have. And we've got a question that's come in from James Chialis from Tata Consulting Services. And he asks, how do you avoid looking like sustainability washing when you're the real deal? So I don't know if anyone wants to take that question. Or woke washing, as we talk about in terms of, Maggie, some of the commitments that companies made, directly in the aftermath of 2020. How are they living up to some of those statements? And if you are living up to it, how do you really show up and get credit for that?
Well, I would just say, I mean, I think Jorge, you might feel the same way, but I mean, as a nonprofit in this work, it's, it's longevity, right? Like, don't come in and think that this is, going to be a 1-year partnership. When you're looking at those partners, really spend the time and thinking about how can you commit to a multi-year connection and doing that work long-term, because it is a journey. And so I think that's one thing. I think another thing is also thinking about, the reality that it's not just one tool or one lever. So you're probably not going to find one nonprofit that's just going to like cover all your bases, right? So I think as you're looking at different partners in this work, remember that one of the things we talk about is it's about your work, your workers, and your workplaces, right? I mean, companies and corporations and nonprofits are made up of individuals. So we need to do that work. And how are you thinking about that work on multiple levels, not just a policy level, but also an individual level, but not one or the other, right? So how are you creating more holistic approaches to create more anti-racist work? So from a woke washing standpoint, I would say I'll just leave it at that. That's some of the things that we've been talking a lot about.
Great. Thanks, Maggie. Jerry, do you have a comment to add to that?
Yeah, I think for businesses, you avoid being seen as greenwashing or whatever by being completely transparent about what you're going to do, and then you report back on it. You have to be open about what your commitments are. And when you fall short, you have to talk about it the same way as when you succeed at what you're doing. And I think the experience of Ben & Jerry's is that when you're honest about things, consumers, fans are more than willing to give you the benefit of the doubt. It's when people feel like you're not being open and transparent that they get concerned.
Yeah.
I mean, I mentioned a little before about after the murder of George Floyd, when businesses and business leaders spoke out as never before and made all these commitments. Well, it's a little while later now, and the media is starting to look into who really followed up on those commitments. And it's kind of interesting that the media has to do that digging as opposed to the people who made those commitments themselves coming and forward and saying, yeah, we were able to do this, and yeah, we were not able to do that.
Yeah, I think there's something very human about what you're talking about, this humility and being able to be honest about it, just as you would be in any other human relationship. But I think as companies, sometimes we think we need to be perfect, and that's not always the case, maybe. Jorge, I think we're getting close. We're going to have one. Yeah, have a comment, and then we've got to wrap this up. Unfortunately, we're getting close to the end of the hour.
Oh, yes. I mean, I think the one thing I would add is that if there were any brand to lift up, it would be the authenticity of Ben & Jerry's and the strength of the communication. And I would also say that there really is no one organization that we can say is anti-racist, right? And so, so I think that's where we're all on the level playing field. The climate change, the climate justice work is much further along, and yet it is really not yet a climate justice effort, right? We're talking so much more about getting carbon out of the air, but not enough about how we ensure that we create a better planet for all people along the way, right? And so I think that's where our commitments and the ways in which B Corps are modeling, exactly what Ben & Jerry is saying from Ben & Jerry's about transparency, right? Being able to get clear and comfortable that reporting is part of the process of achieving that baseline, and then those commitments will evolve also, because we're also about continuous improvement, right? We don't expect that we're going to see necessarily radical change in a short period of time. And I think that's where some of the fear that business leaders have stems from, is making commitments that they can't reach. And quite frankly, it's better that we create bold ambitions, right? And try and move the needle forward rather than feel like we're hitting the mark every time.
No, and I think, thank you so much for these insights. We've got a minute left. Thank you to this panel. You've been phenomenal. You've given your wisdom like I knew you would. And I know it's going to be so insightful for the people watching this. And I think if we've heard anything today, if I can sum up these incredible guests that we've had on the panel, I think it's number one, be human. Don't be afraid to be yourself. You don't have to be perfect. And number two, it's okay to make a mistake. You're not going to get everything right. But the courage comes from taking those chances and really exploring what your values can be and making turning those values into action. So this has come to a close. We're on the hour. I'd like to thank all the panelists for joining us today and for everything. And we will be reaching out with the free pint coupons for all these amazing comments and insights and questions that we've had today. We'll be following up with you through social media. So thank you so much. Over to you guys. Final goodbye.
Thank you so much for having me.
This has been fantastic. Here's what a free pint coupon looks like.
This is the deal. Maybe we should have shown that earlier to motivate people.
It's real currency. It's great to be with all of you.
Likewise, thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.